Red Faction was an interesting and ambitious title back in the day. Released as technology began to advance beyond the ability to both move and look while shooting, Red Faction's big claim to fame was the Geomod engine, which allowed for destructible environments in a way we hadn't seen much of before. How did this turn out, and more importantly, how does it hold up? That's a tricky question to answer. The backdrop to the game is simple and effective, if not executed particularly great. You play as Parker, a young man among many sucked into promises of adventure and riches mining for the Ultor Corporation on Mars. Without any true oversight, however, Ultor is free to abuse the monopoly it has set up over the planet, in particular abusing its workers with brutal working hours and living conditions at gunpoint from their security division. That's not bad enough. A plague is infecting miners left and right, which is, of course, revealed to be tied into plots of the ever-nefarious Ultor. The miners aren't taking this completely lying down, however. Most have secretly formed a resistance under the direction of EOS called the Red Faction, and are lying in wait for the opportunity to strike. The true resistance really comes about after a particularly brutal day of work, when a guard attempts to strike a miner, sparking a mass revolution across the mines with Parker front and center for it all. And thus is he sent on a string of objectives, ultimately attempting to survive the chaos breaking out across Mars as the full extent of Ultor's actions and capabilities is revealed to the player. It's a good startup to a story which doesn't try to steal too much focus from gameplay with exposition. For instance, it's never outright stated to us that EOS is suffering from the plague, even though she has obvious symptoms. This is especially good because the execution for the story is little to write home about. Parker only talks in cutscenes, and after the prologue it's a bit of a shock to the system when the game finally breaks into another one a full third of the way through and we hear our protagonist speak again. Most of the voice acting ranges from barely passable to weak, so it's a good thing the game tends to focus its storytelling more around the gameplay and objectives themselves rather than narrative. In that regard, the game actually plays very similarly to Half-Life. There are a few breaks in location, Parker's story showing nearly every last step he takes as he delves into a multitude of facilities to enter this shuttle, locate that person, or deactivate that technology. I still find it strange that we're faced with a Parker who is decidedly mute during most of the game, only to speak up clearly and often during cutscenes, and I've never been a fan of this in games, especially when other characters keep talking. But when faced with the idea of Parker speaking more than he already does...
Shut up, Weasel! If Eos didn't want you, you'd be dead by now. I'll decide when it's time to go.
So I can't find an enemy to complain overly much. So in this regard, while it strikes similarities to Half-Life, it isn't nearly so fluid. Which is about par for the course for most of the game, really. Red Faction offers up quite a bit of the same which made Half-Life so enjoyable, just not quite as much done well in the polish department, despite it being a more ambitious title. There are things it does very well. The weapon variety is excellent, and the weapons themselves are introduced gradually and in a manner which makes each and every one useful at some point in the game, even though some are clearly far more powerful options. NPCs, not so much. AI tends to be rather pathetic and stiff in their animations, often standing in open corridors and firing or fleeing in terror only to turn tail and attack for no conceivable reason. Friendlies are mostly just there to give you some information or fire a few rounds before dying just as they could actually manage to be somewhat useful. Bosses aren't much better, with an early standout before they go progressively downhill with a frustrating set of abilities which generally aren't fun to play against. Vehicle sections offer up good variety and tend to be just short enough that it doesn't sink in just how shallow their gameplay actually is, but just long enough for you to wreck a few faces first. Then there's the environment destruction of the engine, which was so hyped. It's a cute toy they included, but is honestly a non-factor within the game, really only useful in scripted sequences designed around it, and having almost no capability in large chunks of the game where there is no rock or grating to destroy. Altogether, this makes for a rather choppy game. Some parts work out great. The early sections of the game feel like a desperate flight as you gather any weapons and equipment you can get your hands on, while a revolution you don't altogether understand breaks out around you. Later, things grow a bit stale as you enter a more sterile environment with your general shooter weapons and enemies. This turns into a slog as the game introduces you to a couple stealth sections which are thankfully optional but no less poorly designed and more than a little silly should one bother to stop and think about it. This is capped off by a slog through a tunnel system where you must face some boring, forgettable creatures in a boring, sterile environment which feels suspiciously like filler. But then the game picks up again as new and better weapons become available and your enemies more varied in their use, with environment and encounter variety hitting a generally steady peak from there on out. We'll need to putter off a bit at points on harder difficulties as enemies wielding a certain weapon which happens to shoot through walls and can one-hit kill you without ability to dodge become more and more common, not to mention annoying. Thus the question still stands. How does Red Faction hold up? As you can see, this is a difficult question to answer. Graphics certainly aren't great even considering its release, and the voice acting is mediocre even if the story is enough to put you in the game and give you a mindset it wishes. But it all comes down to gameplay, and even back in the day, Red Faction was not a perfect game. Still, it does things you really don't see much out of shooters today, and the variety of play options and settings can be very fun to toy with. There are lulls to the game to be certain, and the AI doesn't present the best of challenges, but the encounter design tends to make up for this. All in all, this isn't a title for those looking for a modern shooter or even an arcadey shooter of the day, as Parker doesn't quite have the blazing speed or accuracy as some of his counterparts. It's a moderate-paced title which wishes to take the player on something of a journey, with experiences both familiar and not so much. If you can forgive a few lulls and a bit of frustration, then you might just find a few hours of honest enjoyment. If you need more polish in your game, become frustrated easily, or don't have the patience for some of the more generic aspects of shooters, then I suggest you move on.